I run Metaphorosis magazine. We're an online magazine that publishes new stories every Friday. That'll change actually at the end of this year. We're going to shift to publishing a story a month for 2024, but there'll be more details about that coming out. Let me give everybody a chance to introduce themselves as well. Let's go to you, Walt.
Hi, I'm Walt Boys. I'm currently acquisitions editor for Nova's Mundi Press. I ran the Grantville Gazette for 6 years, and I was editor-in-chief of Ring of Fire Press for about 8 years.
Okay. Jane and then Scott.
Hi, I'm Jane Noel, DreamForge magazine. We're online and print magazine, focusing on positive science fiction and fantasy. Our theme for the coming year is the grand uplift, and Scott can talk a little about that.
Yeah, I'm Scott Noel. I'm Jane's husband, and I'm the editor of DreamForge magazine. And we tend toward positive stories. Names that can go under are like solar punk and hope punk, but anything essentially with a more positive theme. This year we challenge people to send us stories in what we're calling the grand uplift, and to if you have in mind like David Brin's uplift idea where you're uplifting other civilizations, ours is more of a humanity bootstrapping itself into a better future kind of idea. But anything that's science fiction, fantasy, and just basically has a more positive, the human adventure is just beginning theme is what we're about. But we publish quarterly. We have a digital quarterly in our web portal that's online, and then we collect the stories from like the first half of the year into a print issue, and then the second half of the year into another print issue. So 2 print issues a year, and you can learn about us at dreamforgemagazine.com.
Okay, great. I just want to mention for those who may hear this in the background, I'm up in on Mount Hood. Let's see, I'm staying in a place with a Sasquatch theme. We're doing some mushrooming, and my dog is here and really eager to get going. She loves wandering through the woods mushrooming, so you may hear her in the background saying, "Oh, I want to go." So just ignore that. She's not being tortured other than having to wait. Faith and Jake, if you want to introduce yourselves, you're welcome to. No pressure if you don't. Okay.
Sure. Faith Allington, just a writer of mysteries and speculative fiction.
Okay.
And I work in technology.
Jake, the floor is yours if you want it.
I'm Jake. I'm just a writer here to learn.
Okay, great. Let's jump in then. If either of you has questions, if not, then I'm sure we can come up with something to talk about.
I just have maybe one question for Scott and Jane. Just is there an example or two that you think of a writer that's done just like a really fantastic job of solar punk or hope punk? Just someone that comes to mind, or a story.
That's a good question. We have some examples that we've published in DreamForge, except my brain just doesn't work very well. Jane, you can help me out. The Steph Troths, or Anna Sunba is her writer name. The one with the dandelions. What was that one called?
Dandelion Brew.
Dandelion Brew, which was a near future Earth story, which very nicely had a protagonist that was very nature, earth-centered, conscious, coming into conflict with a more sort of industrialized thing, but not making anyone the enemy, and essentially finding how they found common ground and were able to move forward, for the betterment of the area that she lived in. So that idea, like, I guess one of the things that I don't like, we're in a submission period right now, and one of the things I don't like is people clearly, telegraphing these people bad, these people really good, community-based, humanity-based, how do we move forward kind of things together. But Anna Sun does that very nicely. Susan K. Quinn, who has also written for us, has done a story, and Again, I can picture the cover art, but I can't remember the name. Jane, what was the name of her story with the Joy Fund?
Yeah.
Oh, my brain is kicking in this morning. There you go.
Yay.
She wrote a story for us called the Joy Fund, which basically looked at the advent of the generative AI intelligence that we're dealing with now. But again, not making it evil, just making it something that's happening that people need to deal with, but are concerned about, and how do you integrate that stuff? So you know, I tend to look at the authors that we've published as doing a good job in that, because even in our submission period here, one of the problems I'm having is too much that idea of stories that are extremely preachy, or stories that definitely have to you know, if they do show something that's a utopian thing beyond us, it really heavily says, oh, and those people from, you know, the 21st century, you know, they were just horrible and evil and destroying the world, and, you know, that sort of thing. And I'd much rather see a story that says, oh, and they ran into trouble and those people figured out how to solve it, and aren't we the beneficiaries of that? You know, that kind of thing. So
and both of those, Susan K. Quinn and Anna Sun, wrote essays, treatises, something along that line, of solar punk and hope punk, and they are full of references and links that they're
yes.
fantastic articles.
And those articles are free to read online. Just they're in our web portal, but you can get to that from DreamForgeMagazine.com and look in the last couple issues. And these are college level referenced materials, well-researched materials. They're not just fluff pieces. So another one on solar punk,
name
one on
on
hope punk.
The big on the solar punk front that we really like is Serena Ulibarri. She's World Weaver Press, and like Solar Punk Gardens, I think, is one of her winter gardens, summer gardens, something along those lines, or some of her books that she edits as well as writes in the solar punk kind of field.
Yeah, and what were two of her anthologies? Were Solar Punk Winters and Solar Punk Summers, or something like that?
It was something along that line. I don't remember exactly the names on them. I can picture the covers, but I don't have the names of them.
Yeah, communitarianism as a subject is gaining a lot of traction. I have an author whose novel is either just out or coming out soon, Mark Roth Whitworth. If you go to Balticon or Capclave or one of those, you might have seen him. His novel is called Becoming Terran, Terran. And it is extremely communitarian in all of the good senses that you're talking about. I loved it. I hope everybody else does too. That's something that personally I've been quite interested in for a long time, because I just spent the week talking with people about AI of a variety of different kinds, including large language model, generative AI. And it seems that there are tremendous opportunities to use AI in ways that benefit people, not just the 2 trillionaires or something like that. But I really am concerned that there are no controls on what people do with AI. I serve as the vice president of the Heinlein Society, and we give out $4,000 scholarships every year, one of which must be given to a woman in a STEM field. These are all STEM scholarships. We got 750 odd applications, which include 2 essays. And over a third of them were written by ChatGPT.
Oh.
And we had to eliminate those as best we could. it's a highly competitive scholarship, but we wanted to see what the people thought and wrote, not what Chat GPT thought and wrote. So we've got a problem, and we've got to figure out what to do about it. Are you guys seeing significant numbers of stories that are obviously written or assisted by artificial intelligence?
We are not well, there's a couple things. One, we have our own submissions portal. So unless someone makes an account with us to submit a story, they're not going to get anything into our portal. And it doesn't look like we've been under attack by any kind of AI to do that at the moment. Now, as far as people actually just using AI to write their story and submitting it, we're still going through our process. We don't have the time or any method to basically say, well, hey, you submitted a story and it looks like it was written by AI. What we would do is basically we're going down through and selecting what stories do we want to have under consideration, and we do that process very quickly. Mm-hmm. Now, in the end, when we go to select that story, I will probably now, as part of my routine, is take either that story or a section of that story possibly and put it through one of the systems that are online now that say, hey, we think this was AI written, or we think this is entirely human written. But Jane and I, our company that is actually our day job company is a digital marketing and web development company, and we're heavily into understanding AI and doing things with that now. So one of the things I know, for instance, is that AI, the cleaning systems I'm talking about, where you look at them and it's like Chat Zero or whatever, and it says this was human written or not human written. They're just algorithms. They're just picking up on things. They're picking up on, which I can explain if anybody wants to know, but they pick up on things like what's called language perplexity. Does it seem, and they pick up on burstiness, which is overuse of keywords kind of thing. But humans do that too. And since I play and work with AI a lot, I love to experiment. I'm the person who, you show me a new technology and I'm lost for like a week. It's like, how does this work? What are its weaknesses? All that kind of stuff. That's me. And so, for instance, I've seen that if I take an old sea shanty and put it into one of those things, it'll say this was written entirely by AI, and it's like, no, it wasn't. Things like, one of my favorite sort of naturalist philosophers is Jacob Bronowski. He wrote The Ascent of Man, and he has a quote that I absolutely love, which is about, when there was a point where man became not a figure in the landscape, but a shaper of the landscape. And there's like a little paragraph that goes along with that. And you put that in, it's like, this was entirely written by AI. No, it was written by Jacob Bronowski before there was even an internet, before there were computers that people used. So it has limitations. And I just said all that because there's a danger that like editors and that sort of thing will run something through and it says, this is likely written by AI. And it's like, maybe.
Yeah, maybe not.
Maybe not.
I was at MIT, and I was walking through the MIT museum, and there was a sign that said that the current geological epoch is the Anthropocene, and it's pretty stunning. I read people using that in polemics, but it's pretty stunning to think that that's actually the real scientific term for the epoch we're living in.
Well, the problem is that they can't, nobody can agree on when it would have started. And I can't remember what the various dates are. The discovery of nuclear power, the Hiroshima bomb. There's a variety of other contenders, I think, but nobody can quite agree on when it should have started, because obviously we've been shaping the landscape for a long time.
Yeah.
Not quite as destructively as now, but.
Well, one thing I wanted to go back to the idea we were talking about with community. We have a group of writers called Dreamcasters that they're our Patreon supporters, and we meet with them regularly and have some talk and have speakers and stuff like that. And one of the things that we had some discussions about is how hard it is to write community. It's easier to write, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy kind of stories, than it is, here's the community, let's work together to solve the problem. And the community sort of indicates there's not a singular hero. The community is the hero. And that concept is much harder to kind of come across, especially in short fiction. You know, that's a really hard thing. So I'm real interested to read what you had said was Mark's Becoming Terran. I'm real interested in that to see how he did with the community concepts on that.
I think you'll like it. Mark is a extremely good writer, and this is second or third book of his that I've seen that I liked, and I used to buy his short fiction quite a bit when I was the editor of the Grantville Gazette. So I think you'll like it. You know, the idea of the community as the hero. Eric Flint got an assignment to write for an anthology that was about there's a pandemic that turns everybody that gets the disease into mindless cannibalistic apes. And what he did, as opposed to what everybody else in the story, everybody else in this story universe gets big guns and shoots and tries very, very hard to kill all these. He decided that his neighborhood, he based it around the actual neighborhood he lived in East Chicago. And what he did was he made the community the hero, and the only reason these people survived and didn't get the disease was because they went and looked out for each other. It's a beautiful story. It's the only story in that whole anthology that I'll read again.
We had a very nice sense of like the idea of zombies and that sort of thing. We had a story recently. I think it was Maria Balk Gonzalez wrote it. It's called Vern Frank Returns to Our Neighborhood. And it's that idea. It's a zombie story. It's like there are these zombies that are appearing, you know, that sort of thing. And admittedly, she doesn't make them, you know, brain-eating violent zombies, but more like a metaphor for the homeless kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And what happens is people come together to try to figure out, why are they still alive? Why aren't they at peace? You know, how do we deal with them? How do we bring them back to peace and make them realize that it's their time to leave, sort of thing? And it's a very touching story in that way, with, you know, focusing on a protagonist who really doesn't particularly want to get involved, but she knew this guy Vern Frank that she runs into, and she just, you know, feels I need to do something. And in the end, by the end, she ends up essentially becoming a caseworker, you know, to help, you know, zombies find their peace. So yeah, the stories like that.
But some of the community aspect of that was this protagonist didn't figure out that the reason why these people were still here was that they were unsettled and they needed help. It was a little girl that figured it out, that's like what that particular, it wasn't Vern Frank even, it was another zombie. She just figured out what he needed and gave it to him. And that sort of lit the candle then that the protagonist could say, oh, Vern needs this, and let's give this to Vern. And, you know, and all of the community was annoyed by them, kind of like you're annoyed by the homeless. It's not like they're going to eat my brains, but, you know, they're coming into my store, or
they're smelly and they're disrupting my business, and, you know, all that kind of thing. And the story does go through that range. It obviously has, you know, the people who are, you know, not happy with this at all, who are not going to be fair to the zombies, don't want to have anything to deal with that, you know, even will close their stores up and leave, you know. So it goes through that range of people who are annoyed, who are openly hostile to people who are trying to help, and it just, you know, paints a nice picture.
We had an interesting incident in Port Angeles a couple of months ago. These kids were, I guess, wilding, and they picked on this old homeless man and beat him up pretty badly. And the community turned around and took care of him, nice. Which I thought was very, very nice. But what he said really stuck in my head, and I'm trying to see whether it's enough to write a story around. He said, "You folks have made me feel like the person I used to be."
Wow. that would be very much like our story that we're just talking about. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it was. And the two kids didn't get the praise and approbation they were looking for by trying to drive the homeless out of Port Angeles. When you have, we're a county of about 27,000 people, and we have about 700 Airbnbs. And this is not owner occupied Airbnbs. This is Marriott came in and bought 200 houses and stuff like that. And nobody can afford to live there if you didn't buy your house sometime back. So it's nice. It really, really is nice to see that people are thinking of themselves as a community and they are fighting back against this stuff.
Because you don't hear this on the news. You only hear the bad parts on the news. You never hear the parts where people are doing good.
No, because it isn't newsworthy.
It's not going to drive ratings. You know, yes, it's newsworthy. Yeah. It's not going to drive ratings. You know, that's the kind of thing that, you know, because when you were talking about AI, one of my favorite AI stories was recently, it was on, I think it was How I Built This. And NPR has the Planet Money and How I Built This web podcast. And on How I Built This, they were talking to a guy who didn't really know anything about recycling. He was not part of the recycling industry, but he was part of tech, and he wanted to work with robotics. And one of the things that he's building is a system of robotics using AI that can sort recycling, because that sorting the stream is the thing that causes the most. It's the cost. And he's looking at how can I get the cost down to where it's actually profitable to recycle. And that will solve a lot of our recycling issues if people can make money doing it and not just doing it, you know, for the good, but they're actually making money doing it. And I really like that idea of let's get robots that can sort our stream so that we can actually, you know, recycle this stuff, good for everybody, but it can actually be a profitable job for people.
That does work. Do you own a Polar Tech fleece, a hoodie or a jacket or something?
I heard that story too. Yeah.
Polar Tech is entirely recycled pop bottles.
Oh, that might not even be the same story, because there's one that I heard that was recycling clothing, and they're working with a fashion brand to recycle clothing. And they said just the scraps on the cutting room floor of a sewing shop can be recycled, but they're working with uniform companies to recycle. And anything cotton and polyester, they actually have a process that can separate the cotton and polyester, and there is virtually no loss in materials as they recycle them over and over and over again.
That's really cool.
That is really cool. Because they said there's enough clothing made now that if we recycled the clothing we had now, we would never have to use oil to create polyester again.
Likely so. Of course, this offends the heck out of people whose life work is employing people to make more polyester.
Always winners and losers. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it would be really nice if we could start constructing issues where we have win and win, and not winners and losers.
Well,
I keep believing that's possible.
it's hard sometimes.
I would like to believe that's possible too. Yeah.
With the government the way it is, it's not looking promising at the moment.
Well, and it's the moneyed interest and things too that would keep that from happening a lot. But the idea, you know, that people are aware of that winners and losers, and how can we take those losers and make sure they're not losing? You know, it's a great concept. It'd be a good community kinds of thing to take on. But I think right now there's too much moneyed interest to do things that in the government. you know.
You
that
have
brings
to
us-
work.
That brings us around a bit back to Faith's original question a bit. Faith or Jake, do you have other questions that you'd like us to address? We're venturing a little farther afield in writing.
I'm just happy hearing you guys talk about whatever.
All right. All right. Good.
One of the things I could do for these guys is, since we're in the middle of a submission period, I can kind of let them know what I'm seeing and, problems that I'm seeing. Does that sound good to you guys? You want to hear a little bit?
Yeah,
of
that sounds great.
All right. Okay. So, as I said, we want positive fiction. Whether it's fantasy or science fiction, our kind of theme is kind of the Star Trek, the human adventure is just beginning kind of sensibility. And we have a little bit of a challenge this year, what we call the Grand Uplift, which is show me humanity moving, beyond its current troubles into, the next stage kind of thing. What I'm actually seeing in submissions is kind of how brainwashed everybody is in that 80-90% of the stories I get is basically humanity's lost and done for. Their idea again, they're in good faith, reading what we're asking for and saying hope and uplifting, and hope and uplifting means that a Mad Max landscape, and at the end, the protagonist finds the crust of bread and might save this other person, and they might be able to, eat for another day as the climate collapses around them. So that, is a little bit of an exaggeration, but that's what people think is hopeful today. And, that's not what I want to see.
That's positively frightening.
Yeah. But that's it. The other thing, just in terms of writing, like that's what I see as far as a theme conflict. That seems to be what the writers think as far as where we're going. It's all disaster and death. But as far as the writing itself, what I see are general mistakes. We were just talking about communitarianism and community. A lot of writers really are stuck on the chosen one kind of narrative. So there is a protagonist who however, chosen by God or society or luck or whatever, they're the key thing that's going to change the world. And that specifically is really something I don't want to see, because I don't believe it. And one of the interesting points that writers really seem to love their chosen character. So they'll not only make a chosen one, but that chosen one will face no trials and make no decisions. Other characters in their little entourage will do everything for them, including when there is some kind of threat, step in front of the bullet, just so at the end of the story we can all say, oh, the chosen one is here. So don't do that. That's a big problem. The other one is basically exposition. People really want to tell me about the world, rather than having me live in that environment with a character. And I was just thinking about it this morning. I'm a big Star Trek fan, kind of obviously, but at 9 years old, when I saw the very first Star Trek episode on TV, there'd never been anything like it before. We've got people essentially beaming down to a planet. They're using these phasers, which obviously are more than just laser guns. And none of it is explained. None of it. They just put you into action, live with these characters, and figure it out. It's like, oh my God, that's a means of transport. Oh my God, this is a super powerful weapon. It's like, oh my God, it's a starship. It's some kind of not quite military, but there's like an organizational thing going on here, and you just fall into it and you fall in love with it. And that's what I want to see from stories, not whereby the second paragraph you start explaining in the 21st century, there was mass consumerism and it nearly destroyed the climate. And, don't explain anything to me. Show me a world and show me characters in it who are getting past a problem or moving forward. So we've got,
as you know, Bob,
find a few of those, but
as you know, Bob, yeah.
As you know, Bob, yeah.
One of the things that I've commented on before that I see a lot is that people recognize that they have some sort of a context problem. They want to provide context, and they solve that by doing an info dump, because they're like, okay, I'll just get all the context out right now. I'll tell you what the world is. I'll explain it. And that just doesn't work. A, it's boring to read. And B, it almost never provides the context that I'm looking for. It tells me about something else and something else, but it's not the questions that I'm interested in about, you know, I don't know, why is the character here or whatever it may be. So I think when you have that kind of expository info dump, that's almost always a sign, not that you're doing a great job in getting the information out, but that you're missing something, and you'd be much better off cutting out that info dump and providing the context in some other more seamless way.
I even tell people, it's like, I know you want to write that, so go write it and then put it aside. It's like, that's your background information. And now that you have that background information, write the story. And you know, don't put that in the story. The other thing is dialogue. People, when they finally get to the point where they understand they can't write the info dump, they put the info dump in dialogue.
That's the, as you know, Bob, that, yeah.
And dialogue, the purpose of dialogue is not that at all. It's basically, you know, to help us understand the emotional state of the characters and their relationships with one another, and how they're able to communicate, but it is not to explain the story to me. So
But there was something that you told me just the other day about somebody that you thought did a brilliant info. Was that Andre?
Oh, Andre Norton. Yeah, I also tend to read old books. So I'm reading Stargard by Andre Norton, and she
nice book.
Yeah, there's a point where she needed to get information across, and the way she did it was have her protagonist be half asleep and hear people that they knew were important discussing something, and then they didn't catch all of it, kind of thing. So they, in their mind, had to interpret, I think that means this, you know. And in doing that, they, you know, I'm looking at it like, that's her exposition. That's how I understand what's going to happen in this scene. But it was a living scene moment of a person who's trying to sleep, who's overhearing something, who's realizing, oh shit, those are important people, and what are they saying, and not catching all of it and understanding. They're basically going through the thing we all do in our minds, which is basically trying to understand what's in the mind of another person by basically, you know, making up, I think that means we're going to be doing this. And in that's how they got it across. That's how she got it across. And I just thought, oh wow, that's really cool.
Well, that's an interesting way to get at it, because you see too many of these, as you know, Bob, conversations where it's a conversation that the characters involved would never have, because obviously they know all this. And so they wouldn't say, oh, so the hyper engine is out. Let me explain that the hyper engine was designed in 2035 by so-and-so. You know, it's just that wouldn't happen. So this method you're describing of having the character fill in, oh, the hyper engine, that's the one that was designed in 2035, might be a little more natural seeming.
The other thing that I see a lot is when you finally get them to the point where they're writing dialogue, suddenly they're writing dialogue in a white room. And the floor is white, and the chairs they're sitting in are white, and the walls are white. And you have no idea where they are. And I see that a lot, even more than the, as you know, Bob, and other things. And sometimes it's very hard to get people to break out of that white room syndrome. What do you guys do? You guys see that, and what do you do?
Yeah, I would say we do see that, but more a corollary to that is something that I personally see more often, or more sensitive to more often, and that's basically, and it involves the use of dialogue too, but it's at the beginning of the story, the author thinks that they will make the story intriguing and engage the reader and pull the reader into the story by making the situation confusing. So sometimes that can take the form of the white room syndrome, where you just have dialogue back and forth, where they think that's gonna completely engage the reader. But it can also be just mentions of mysterious things, use of strange words that are spelled weirdly, whatever it might be. But they think by making things a little obfuscated at the beginning, or having lots of action at the beginning, that they're drawing the reader in. And it really doesn't. For me anyway, it just creates a confusing miasma of, I don't know what's going on here. And so I tend to advise, our writers that we work with, it's, yes, you can, once you're a master writer, you can do anything. But for now, what I would like you to see is just do a basic orientation. It's like, let me know where I'm at. You know, am I in a diner in 1950s North Carolina? It's like where am I? Let me know who my protagonist is. You know, is it the guy at the serving? Is it the guy waiting at a table, you know, for his lunch? Like, who is it? And just you know, set the stage for me, just as if you were at the theater and the curtains pulled back. You know, make sure I understand what it is that I'm looking at. And then once I understand that, give me a signal that the story has begun. You know, that inciting incident. It's like, oh, an ambulance just went by the thing. It's like, you know, some signal, you know, or the lady just walked in and fainted. You know, it's like, that's the signal that story is underway now. And then start, you know, pulling me into the story. But yeah, so the White Room thing, we do see that. And I see that, especially at the beginning, people using that or just doing things in a confusing way to like intrigue me, and it's not intriguing.
Well, another thing about the dialogue is the dialogue being natural too. Like Scott used an example that seemed to ring with the people we work with too, is like he'll listen to me talking on the phone where he's hearing my side of the conversation and he's imagining the rest of the conversation. And it reads very differently than most dialogue that you read in the story. And it doesn't read as natural as it should. And if you read it out loud, sometimes you can hear that's not how people actually talk. And trying to get the dialogue how people actually talk is an interesting challenge.
You know, the other problem that I face with stories that begin with dialogue is, and this is not required by the format, but people often just aren't differentiating their characters very well. So you get a lot of back and forth, and the two characters or three characters sound exactly the same.
And you don't know who they are yet. Yeah, you don't even
I mean,
know
they may have names, but I don't know anything about them, what they care about, what they're trying to achieve. And so it means nothing, because all I'm getting is the information literally that they're speaking, but I don't know what their motivations are, why I should care about any of these people. So that's the problem that I see more often, I guess, with that kind of beginning dialogue. The other thing that to finish, the other thing that
for two writers who don't want to make them think that this is all easy stuff. It's like, this is hard stuff. I can't do these things as well as I'd like to.
Even Scott, back to your point about giving the setting. I mean, one of the things that, because we only publish two genres, science fiction and fantasy, and mixes of the two, but we don't do horror, we don't do crime, we don't do mystery, we don't do biography, whatever. But it's remarkable how often the writer doesn't establish in any way what the genre is. And it's okay. Sometimes it's urban fantasy, and, you know, it's not quite as clear cut, but, you know, I've read stories where you have somebody sitting down and they say, oh, I have to make my appointment today, you know, to get my compound made. And you're halfway down the page before you realize it's a wizard sitting in a tavern who's having a potion made. And I'm like, oh, okay, wait. So that's pretty easy to do. You just throw in the word tavern, you're pretty much done. You know, all right, it's a fantasy story.
Right. I have read stories like that where I think I'm reading a science fiction story and it turns out to be a fantasy, or vice versa. And it's very jarring when I think I'm only a paragraph or two in and I think I've got one thing and I find out it's not. And even the title probably didn't give it to me, or I would have had that expectation. So you do have to really make sure that you're not disappointing the reader before they even get started.
Yeah, because the writer obviously knows all about this, and so they don't think about things. I know it's a fantasy story. I know it's epic, this and that and the other. The other thing, just Jane, since you mentioned this, on titles, I mean, I read the title, but I don't usually think, okay, I read the title, I'm going to have this exact expectation of the story. It's just sort of a label. I start the story sometimes without really having thought about the title. And so there are some stories that absolutely rely on the title to get you set in the frame of mind. And for me, and at least some other readers, that doesn't happen. So it's great. Maybe afterwards you think, oh, that title, that was really clever for that story. But don't assume that I'm going to remember what it is going into the story.
The kinds of setups that work really well they're hard to learn to do. They're hard to do, but when you do them, they just nail you. One of my favorites is The Door Dilated. That tells you enormous amounts
Mhm.
about what's going on in the story, what the milieu is, everything else. And it took Robert Heinlein 3 words to do
Yeah.
that.
I was going to say that's a Heinlein. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
one of the things I sometimes I start to write out, okay, these are the things you need to accomplish in your first line or your first paragraph. I don't believe in magic first lines, but to set things up. And it's an incredible number of things. And so it seems really daunting if you list it out, which is why I usually don't share that with anybody. But it's actually not as hard to do as it seems. It's hard to make it really, really good, but it's not as hard as it seems to establish the genre, the time, the characters, the intent of the story. A lot of this is pretty natural. So you can get at least in the middle range of that pretty easily, despite the daunting list of things that are supposed to happen.
Yeah, I'm going to he probably won't mind, but one of my authors that just sent me a story, who's one of my best authors, but I'm just going to read the first line of the story he has for submission here. To catch a Foo Fighter, you need 3 things: tech, speed, and bait. I'm the bait.
ooh, I like it.
Is that
That's-
David?
Yeah, it's David Hankins. We published his first story.
Yeah, he won a Writers of the Future last year too. He was I think a second place finisher in one of the quarters, and he has an attitude to his writing that really comes through. And he really targets humor, and just as soon as he said that, I'm like, yeah, I bet that's David. I hadn't read the story. I did not know that. I just guessed that was him. And that getting that first
Now you-
line, getting
Now
that
you got
opening-
me wanting to read the rest of the story.
Yeah.
I haven't finished it yet, so I don't know whether it has problems beyond that, but I'm happy so far.
Faith or
So I think
Lee,
you
can I-
mentioned,
Go
Scott, that
Go ahead,
you,
Faith.
pull kind of you look for the things that you're going to put under consideration and sort of set those aside, and then I assume kind of reject other things. Is that everyone's process? I'm assuming everyone's doing it a little differently, but
Everyone, I think,
well,
does it a little differently, but Scott, why don't you go
yeah.
ahead and do yours, and then Walt, and then
Everybody does do things a little differently. Like I just in talking to editors, like I know Neil Clark at Clark's World has a very rigorous procedure where he actually trains his essentially slush readers, and they actually almost go through an apprenticeship before they get to a certain point where so everybody does do it differently. We just basically have volunteers that we have from all over the world. We call them first line readers. We don't reject stories. We just we return them. We try to get across the idea that the world out there is sending us hundreds to thousands of stories. I can publish a very handful of those. Because we sent your story back doesn't mean that you aren't able to write, or that it wasn't a good story, or that we didn't like it. I send lots of stories back that I like. I just was telling somebody today that if I was in charge of, several magazines with several different, genres or different themes, I've already sent back well over a dozen stories that I could have purchased and used in one of those. Sometimes I look at a story and it's like, damn, I wish I could start a magazine that did this, because it's a great story for that. But I'm returning it because it's not exactly what we're doing in DreamForge, right now or whatever. But so people submit their stories into our submission portal. Then our first line readers start reading through them. They do 2 things. We have a star system, 1 to 5 stars. 1 star does not mean your story is badly written and is awful. It means that the first line reader does not believe that it is a DreamForge story, that it's something we should be considering for DreamForge for one reason or another. It could be horror, there could be, explicit sex in it, it's whatever. Or it could have a confusing beginning. So it's that whole range. They've just looked at it and said, don't think this one's going to make it, and then as they go on, by the time they get to 4 stars, they're basically saying you should really be considering this. If they put 5 stars on it, they're saying, and if you don't want this story, I will fight with you, as to why you should take this story. But so they rate it and then they give me some comments. They basically tell me what was their experience. And we try to encourage people, basically you're here to basically find good stories and to be kind. I don't need snarky comments on why this person failed to do something, but telling me that I got to page 3 and I just lost interest. That's a perfectly valid comment. The writer did not keep engaging you so that you kept going. Or they might say has lots of typos you should look out for, or engaging beginning, but then it goes into exposition. But they're just going to do a few comments and they're going to let me know when they bailed out, that they didn't read the story. Or if they did read the story and they really liked it and what were the qualities that they liked, they'll let me know what they thought was really well done. So then I'm following behind them, and I will pick. We're just doing these in the order that they come in. So I'm looking at the story, and then other people do it differently. Like there are editors who want to just read the story and not even know what their first line readers said till after, whatever. The way I want to do it is I want to see what they thought. Is it 1 star and why did they bail out? And then I want to confirm that when I look at the story. So I'm looking at the story, and if I get to the point where I say, yep, obvious that my first line reader was perfectly correct. Sometimes I disagree entirely. Like I have published 1 star stories that just nobody else got, including Jane. And I'm telling this is a really important story, and this is why. And it's like, we just didn't get it, but my final decision. So, I'll say, but I'm buying this one. But I'll read through them and add my own comment or whatever. And then I mark it for return for one of our editorial assistants to basically send it back to the author. We have a nice little letter template, which is very friendly and explains this idea that we're not rejecting you, we're returning your story because we can't use it right now. And if I've made some nice comments, like I'd really like to see more from you, we try not to get into telling them stuff that's structurally wrong with the story, just because we really tried to do that for the first years, because I am a natural teacher. It's like, let me tell you all the things here in the story that I'd like to talk to you about, because here's where this could have been done better and all that. That just got us into a host of trouble. We got called out on social media. We've been threatened. We've been given voodoo curses from an actual voodoo queen. So we learned our lesson that basically people don't want constructive criticism. They basically want praise. Some people who are more serious about their craft may want to engage you, but that's why we have our Dreamcasters group, where they're actually, supporting the magazine, and they're actually there to receive information on why they did things badly or wrong or whatever. But in general, if we have something nice to say, we'll say it. We're not really going to get into constructive criticism unless we really know the author. And then we might say, hey, we think it failed here or whatever. But that's our process. So, takes us, we have like 375 stories in the queue right now. We're still open for a couple of weeks. I can get through about 15 a day with everything else I have to do. So we're looking at least the next 25 days or so that we'll be reviewing, and probably beyond that. That's us.
Walt, do you want to tackle your process?
Yeah. When Eric Flint and I and Mike Resnick started Jim Bain's Universe back when we still chipped ebooks out of stone tablets, we had this problem, the same problem that you're talking about, Scott. We had stories that were really good, or stories that were not quite publishable. And Eric, being a phenomenal communitarian, and Mike Resnick being even more so, we decided to put together a writers group that was allied to the magazine, and we did that all the way through the Grantville Gazette. And in fact, the Grantville Gazette, still in its new incarnation, now it's published one thing, it still uses the same thing. There's what we call a crit group, and you submit your story to the crit group, and when the crit group thinks it's good, they turn it over to the editor. I'm mostly publishing full-length novels, I try and do this as much of the same thing as I can. I will get a hold of somebody and say, your baby's ugly, but I have a paint box, and if you're willing to work with me, we can fix it. Because that's what Eric Flint did with me. I hadn't written a story except for nonfiction in 20 years. He got the opportunity to write to put together an anthology for the 1632 universe called Ring of Fire. And he called me up and he said, I want you to write a story for me. And I said, but I haven't read it. And he said, I want to see your story. You have 4 weeks. So I wrote a story and I sent it to him. And he called me up and he said, how is your ego? And I said, what? And he said, how is your ego? Do you take criticism? And I said, yes. He said, good, because you're going to need it. I'm buying this POS, but we're going to workshop it in the crit group in public so people can see what to do and how not to do what you did. And so I try as much as I can to pass that along. Eric and Mike's memory makes me want to do that because, well, Mike Resnick spent the last 15 years of his life mentoring young authors, and a whole bunch of them. He even did a really cool thing. He got old authors like Robert Silverberg to rewrite a story that didn't quite work with a new author. And so there's all kinds of things that I like to do to help people, and I'm limited entirely by the amount of time I have. And I wish it wasn't so. I wish I could devote all of my time to doing that because, God, just like you, I'm a teacher. It's what I really like to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're severely time limited as well because there would be a lot, like there would be a lot of stories that it's like, boy, this has some good bones, but we'd really need to work with it, and we don't have the time to be able to do that like we'd like to.
Yeah, that's actually another like a theory. Like I might have a story that I think is really good, but I'm also looking at, because we're commercial writer. Like I'm a commercial writer. That's what I do on my daily job is I write stuff for businesses and stuff. And so I'm aware of the time of cost and money. And I don't want to, go to the author and say, well, I look at this, and if we spend like 2 weeks working on this, you might get it to the point where it's publishable and stuff. That would be really cool. But we're paying like 8 cents a word. So I really don't, I don't want to devalue your time to the point where you're getting paid 1 cent a word or whatever. So if I see a story that really, like when I work with authors, it's more generally, it's like, hey, great story, you forgot the last paragraph. We did that one with Michael Zahner. He wrote this really wonderful story, and he brought it to an end. It's like, nope, it ends 1 paragraph after that, and here's what needs to be in that paragraph. And that's the kind of thing that I like to do, where I can very much let them know, here's precisely what you need to change, and then you figure it out. You figure out what the change is, but I'm telling you that the change goes right here, or in these places. And then I know that they can do that on a relatively quick, easy basis, and I'm not asking them to spend a whole bunch of time rewriting stuff without knowing whether it's going to make it or not. So I'm kind of doing that, just sensitive to the amount of time that I'm asking them to devote to this, because they could take the story that I think is almost there, and for me they'd have to work 2 weeks. They could take that and sell that somewhere else. It's like, just because it's my opinion doesn't mean that it's not going to work just for the next guy and they're just going to pay for it. So that you have to be aware of that. And you were mentioning ego stuff. It's like, if you want to make sure that you get your ego beat out of you, be a commercial writer. Because
no kidding.
When
yes.
when
been there, done that,
business,
and here's the T-shirt.
Yeah, when we write for businesses in a commercial venture and I'm charging them money for stuff, there isn't any of this, oh, you're the writer, we're going to be nice to you. There is basically, you know, Scott, this is bullshit, you know, fix this, write it, you have 2 hours, whatever. It's like there is no ego that you can afford to do anything. It's like, is the customer happy? Is the customer not happy? Figure out why the customer is not happy, fix it, do it fast. You know, and
Yes.
you know, you at best you're going to get paid. You're very rarely going to get praised. So
And deadlines. And you have
deadlines, and
yeah.
it basically just so you know, I can approach things like if I'm a writer submitting to someone and you know they say, hey, you know, nice of you to submit to us, but this sucks. It's like for me that would be like, eh.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you kind of need to get to. You can't, you know, have that sense that you're being personally attacked.
Yeah. I get that from time to time, but thank God the people who are submitting to me now tend to know that. But those are the ones with the egos are the ones that send you voodoo dolls with pins in them.
It wasn't a voodoo doll. We got a voodoo poem.
We got a voodoo curse. Actually, it was really cool because and again we try to be very gentle. We're really not being super critical. And I think on that one, all we did was say, can't use it here. You know, here's your thing back, and got this long, complicated ranting thing. And then eventually we essentially got, as Jane said, it was like a voodoo curse. It was a voodoo poem curse. And I really wanted to publish the voodoo poem curse. It's like I didn't want to get any more involved with the person, but it's like, this curse you wrote, it is really cool. The story or whatever, not so cool, but this is great.
Did you?
No, didn't want to get more involved with that person. I think that would have been a mistake. But
Yeah.
But it would have been really fun to publish the curse. So
now, Morris, your process is entirely different from our process.
Yeah, ours is pretty much the opposite of what Scott's been describing. Briefly, I read everything first. And then the stories that I think are good, that have promise, I pass on to a set of second readers. We've got 3 now who have been with us for years. And so I know, and their opinions are quite different than mine, but I know where they're coming from. So if they say, I think this is a problem, I know how to interpret that. They say, this is great, I know how to interpret that. But then we do a lot of revision. Everything that we publish has been through at least 2 and up to 10 rounds of revision, depending on how much patience I and the author have and how much the story needs work. And you get some people who, I've had one woman who was a great writer, who rewrote her story from scratch, basically. And I was like, no, that's not what I said. But the second version was even better. So I was like, okay, great, well, we'll do that. But that's not what I was asking for. But you get a lot of people, I say, look, you know, it's too long, it needs this, it has this. And they say, yeah, I moved 3 of the commas. Does it work now? I'm like, no. So the first thing I do when I get a revision back is I use Word and I do an auto comparison and I say, okay, how much did they change? And I compare that with what I think the story needed. If I think the story needed drastic revision and they moved 3 commas, it's not a good sign. If you know, if they did a lot more, then okay.
You give up on them at that point then? If it's like, geez, this needs serious work and there's 3 commas, so you're like, okay, thanks.
Not yet. What I've learned from painful experience, painful for both me and the authors, is to try and make a decision by the second revision, whether it looks like it's going to be working or not. Because if you go on beyond that and then you say, no, I don't want the story, that's certainly hard on the author. They put a lot of work in, good intentions, and it's hard on me because I feel bad about it. So I try and make a determination at that point. Almost always, though, I'm picking stories that I think can make it. And unless the author really isn't going to try, we're going to get to the end somehow. I may not be completely satisfied. They may not be completely satisfied, but it'll work out. And I have had people who send back the first revision, they move the 3 commas, I say, no, here, you know, cut out this middle section, or I usually don't say anything quite so brutal, but, you know, condense it or make it more character oriented, what have you. And then they do a great job the second time around. I don't know if they were testing the waters or they're just lazy, like I am. I'm a very lazy reviser personally. So the first round of revision isn't necessarily the telltale for the thing. If they only moved commas, if in the second revision they've moved 4 commas, okay, then I give up, and it's not going to work for either of us. But yeah, it's a very, that's also in regard to the AI discussion that started all this off. That's, I think, in part why we don't see a lot of that, because we're going to require lots and lots of revision, and you can't just keep shoving it back into Chat GPT with the editor's comments saying, do this. It's not going to work. So.
Yeah. 2 things I want to touch on real quickly is, one, you had mentioned the idea of, what your second readers, you kind of understand them as people and where they're coming from. I get that with my first line readers too. And it's kind of the effect where what each individual one likes or dislikes and what it is they're looking at in the story. And you get that person, it's like, ooh, Mikey likes it, but Mikey hates everything. And then right. And then you get a sense of like, wow, and if other people like it, it must have some good qualities. The other thing I just wanted to point out with it, since I am a commercial writer and we're commercial digital things, we see this really dramatic dichotomy between the creative publishing world and the digital, commercial world, as far as acceptance of AI and what people think of the AI systems. So first of all, DreamForge, we're not looking, because we want to work with writers. It's like our thing. So we're not looking for anything that is written by AI. At some point in the future, when this gets to the point where writers understand this as a tool where they are using it for specific things to enhance or whatever, maybe, but that's just not what we're looking for right now. We don't want somebody to press a button and send us their story. On the commercial side, AI is being adopted so quickly that we've lost customers who've basically said, hey, what do you got in AI? And it's like, not there yet. It's like, okay, bye. So it's massively being adopted across all the tools that we use, including, I saw recently, even in LinkedIn, when you go to make a post in LinkedIn, it says, do you actually want to write this, or do you want the AI to write it for you? That kind of thing. And what we see is potentially massive benefit for the clients that we serve in generating content at a lower cost, making them more competitive with their bigger competitors. But it's still a tool. You don't just press a button and get the result you need. What it can do for me, because I do use it on the commercial side in my writing, because that's all work for hire, and I'm not worried about my copyright or anything like that. But it's basically to save time, much in the way as if I had an apprentice staff. So it's never going to give me exactly, I'm not pressing a button and getting the article that I want, but I'm working with it almost as if I'd work with an apprentice. It's like, one of the things I wrote on the other day was food health in toddlers. It's just one of my customers. And it's like, so I can go to Chat GPT, for instance, and they say, what do you got in potential subjects for, food health in toddlers and gut health and that sort of thing? Gives me a range of subjects. And it's like, okay, let's take a look at this one. And I'll go, look up some information or whatever. And I'll say, okay, here's the structure that I'd like in the document. Here's information for you. Give me, like a first draft on stuff. And then the other thing you have to do is you have to actually still be an expert in what you're doing, because it will hallucinate and give you wrong facts and stuff if you don't know what you're doing. So you can just be giving your customer something that will make them look foolish online because the information is incorrect. But it is a tool that now I can take what might be a 5-hour job and do it in 2.5 hours, 3 hours kind of thing, because it can quickly move things along for me. And that means that I can do more for my clients. I can write them longer articles in less time, that sort of thing. So it is a tool. I would say on the commercial side, if I was hiring another commercial writer, I would expect them to know how to use this tool, rather than on the commercial side saying, oh, you can't use AI and all that stuff. I would say, you don't know how to use AI? I'm sorry, you're not qualified now to work with us at the stage of where things are going. So that's a big dichotomy.
Similar to how I use Google Translate, for example. I speak a number of languages, but I don't always write fluently in those languages. So if I'm writing somebody a letter or an email, I might start with Google Translate to get, okay, yeah, I should use this word rather than the other word. But the grammar is almost never going to be correct. Professional translators don't use Google Translate, but for me, it's a good starting point. But then you have to do a lot of work to it. Or I'll do it the other way around. I'll do the draft and run it through Google Translate to say, okay, did that come out correctly, or am I using the wrong tense in some language that I don't speak very often? So it's never going to be, seldom going to be, at least an endpoint. It's got to be raw material that you work with. That, unless anybody has other comments or questions, I think that brings us to the end of our time. I want to give everybody on the panel a chance to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It looks like Jake has one last question.
Go to it. Any word on? I see that. Any word on when Metaphorosis might open to submissions again? No, and I don't think it'll be anytime soon. I don't have a definite date, but I think it's not for a while. So if you've got a story that you think would be great for us, I think I'd advise you submitting it elsewhere first. And if somebody else buys it, good for them, good for you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, and just to throw in real quick, we accept simultaneous submissions. So just because of the process and the way we do things, it doesn't hurt us in any way whatsoever if you submit something and then tell us, 10 minutes later, hey, somebody else picked it up. What you'll get from us is a congratulations email. It's like, yay, so.
Any announcements from Scott, Jane, or Walt before we close up? Anything you want people to let
Just
people know?
we're open for submissions now. DreamForgeMagazine.com. Go see what we're all about.
Walt, anything on your side?
Send manuscripts.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you all. I appreciate you coming. And we'll do another one of these the next Saturday of November. First Saturday of November, I should say.
Yeah, we'll see you then.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
so much
much.
for hosting. It's been great.
Bye.
Yeah.
All right.
Take good care.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.